So we'll talk about the PARKROYAL project primarily. This is a classic example of a project that I think people look at and say, how did you get a client to agree to this? How did you convince them? But was that the case? Did you have to do convincing, or was it a matter of finding the right person? How did this project come to be, and was there such a negotiation over what is still a very unique design?
It was with a client that we'd done some projects before, including the Newton Suites project with a lot of sky gardens in it. So we were lucky in that there was a level of trust there, I guess, with the client, that when we proposed something a bit crazy, they'd been through the journey, along the journey with us before. So they weren't resistant. I guess they could be positive. They bid for the land based on a feasibility of a very normal kind of building with a basement and a podium and a tower. So whatever we did had to fit within their budget yes. for that. But yeah, they were pretty excited by the design, only worried about potential cost and that sort of thing. But in terms of the craziness of the design, they were quite comfortable with that.
I guess as a hotel in an office environment, the idea was creating a hotel in a garden. It's sort of, Singapore is a garden city, so it's sort of consistent with the marketing of Singapore and also as an urban resort, perhaps. And I think that's something, when you tell the developer of a hotel, we're going to give you a very unique hotel. And I think they say, yeah, that's something they will be giving now. So I think it wasn't that difficult. But I think at the end of the day, will it be a lot more expensive? It would be the question, really.
Yeah, exactly. And I wanted to ask about that. Does the extensive planting and greenery, does that add to maintenance costs? Substantially?
It does, because you need to be maintaining it. But the important thing is that I think they're not really more difficult to maintain than if they're on the ground. So if you picture a hotel maybe not in the middle of the city, but slightly out of the city and it having a garden around it, no one would think that was outrageous. So somehow just because it's on a building, people suddenly feel like the maintenance is this huge deal when it's not.
I mean,
really.
you think of resorts, you've got all the landscaping to maintain, but here it's an urban situation, so this is a rather unusual one. And but we convinced them that the way we've done them, it was really easy to maintain the gardens. It's as if it's on ground level, so you just walk up and maintain it without any gondolas or building management systems.
And I imagine there's benefits to it too. I mean, cooling. Has there been any sort of cost-benefit analysis of what the plantings give back to the building in terms of energy consumption or water retention or anything like that?
Not sort of quantifiable benefits. I mean, and a lot of the benefit is not just to our building, but to the surrounding city, I guess.
Of course.
Like the pure air is just blowing through the building, not held within it. But there's in a way a quantifiable element, which is the within the green mark scoring in Singapore.
This did achieve the highest rating, platinum or green mark. So it did translate into energy savings compared to your standard kind of a hotel developments. So and there is also real-time and post monitoring to this building. So it's this, as we speak, you can actually see whether or not the building is actually performing as it is actually designed.
But a lot of it's like hard to quantify because, for instance, areas that would normally be internal and air-conditioned and artificially lit here are just external. So in a way, you have to set up a comparable building and then compare costs between the two to quantify them. It's not easy just to say we save this much energy.
But one of the things that we think this building is different is what we call civic generosity. And I think what makes it different is that I think these gardens are not only enjoyed by the people who use the buildings, but the people in the city. I mean, in a very dense place like Singapore, where you have lots of buildings that are just concrete and glass, this building really stands out as one that has got lots of greenery in it. And such sky gardens and landscaping does give the city, the people, a relief, I think. It does. And also it provides a habitat for birds and insects. So, and I think that's what we think sets it apart from other buildings.
Have you seen other buildings or projects in Singapore taking this building as an example, following your lead?
Well, not just in Singapore, around the world.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were just on the jury for the World Architecture Festival, which was
Right.
held in Singapore, and we were seeing even in Russia there were projects that were very similar to
Recently
PARKROYAL.
in Brisbane, they were advertising a development that was, and they actually mentioned that it was inspired by the Park-Royal in Singapore.
What's your reaction to that?
Oh, it's great, I think.
It's good.
Because I mean, we do, hopefully with our projects, we see them a little bit like a sort of virus entered into the culture.
Yeah.
And because it seems once you do one, people are much more confident to do it when there's a real example that they can see. And so there's a limit in terms of sustainability and impact that, you know, one firm can have. But if there's 1,000 firms across the globe doing these kind of buildings, then that's a real impact.
I guess that's what we term civic generosity. If it actually inspire another architect or another developer to actually do some of these and give back to the city, I think this project would have gone a very long way to inspire others, I think. Yeah.
Is greenery feasible in Russia, for example? I was just thinking, I mean, it's not a climate that you think of.
Actually,
like
we've done a
Singapore.
project or competition in Frankfurt. And of course, Frankfurt's in a temperate zone. And we've been working with the landscape and horticulturists in Germany. It's all feasible. So,
in fact, more spectacular because you get the
Yes.
changing seasons
Yeah.
through the vegetation.
Correct.
So it becomes quite a dramatic sort of annual show. You
Yeah.
can potentially have a building that's covered with cherry blossom, for instance, and then turns red in the fall.
yeah.
You know,
And
so
you have
it's-
vines that are brightly colored red, you know, in the autumn. And you could have buildings that are quite vibrant changes in color in 4 seasons.
So in this viral model of this idea spreading across the world, what are the challenges? What are the main challenges? What's holding it back from spreading further? Is it difficult to find contractors because this is such an unusual?
No, I think it's. I think the difficulty really is that you really need to start thinking or embracing the ideas of having these gardens, these sky gardens, right from the onset, from a planning design stage. Because if you don't think about it from how you're going to maintain these gardens, it's going to be very hard to come back and say, now I've got all this greenery, how am I going to maintain it? So you really need to tackle it from the moment you start designing it. So I mean, a lot of architects and developers would use PARKROYAL and Pickering as a inspiration, but then they don't really understand how to really go about making it work. And I think that's probably one of the difficult part of it, really.
When you figured out how to make it work, what were some of the key lessons that you think aren't maybe understood as widely?
I think it's a lot is this access because I think if you do have to train gardeners to use Spider-Man access or something like that, that's a complication. You know, you can't just ring up somebody and say, I need to do some trimming.
Yeah.
It's like you've got to create this special class of people who can do it. So our sort of philosophy was, if you can have a wheelbarrow and a rake and you know, some garbage bags, then you can just trundle along to wherever you need to go without going outside any kind of safety zone. That's the ideal. So planning in all of that takes quite a lot of time, making sure you can get to everywhere and sort of adjusting the design to do that. For instance, on Newton Suites, we put all the sky gardens next to the fire escape, so the fire escape becomes the maintenance access for the gardens. So there's sort of strategic things about organising the building and the parts of the buildings early on really help. Cause we see a few projects in Singapore now which are doing things like putting a fairly labour-intensive green wall on the outside, which the building itself can't even see. And I think those are probably doomed to be replaced after several years, because the people paying for it are not the people benefiting from it. So I think another strategy you need to think about is, how do we make sure that the people who are going to be doing the long-term maintenance of this building really get to enjoy them and feel like it's a cost that has a great benefit to them.
Newton Street is a very good example. The people there actually love the vertical greenery, and that the person who's been maintaining it has been the same person almost 10 years ago. And it's you get people who actually write in and demand that the gardens are actually maintained well. So, and I think that's what you do need, is people who actually like them and embrace them, and be the people pushing for maintenance, really.
So some of the things I'm hearing, you want to make it as easy to maintain as a typical landscape job, but then
absolutely
make it anything but a typical landscape job in terms of where it is and what it's doing for the surrounding
It's really
area.
quite simple.
I think there is a certain cost to it too. So I think in a way it gets difficult to justify unless you're in a fairly high density situation where land costs are high. We've had some people, when we've given talks, and they say, oh, I'm from a fairly low-scale country town. How do we do this? And I go, well, actually, you don't really need to do it.
You don't do that.
You've got gardens everywhere as it is.
I think it only works for dense cities like Singapore, and also in the tropics, perhaps, and also the mega cities. And I think those would be the right place to have them.
Are there code or other regulations, code requirements that would hinder the growth of those kind of buildings in megacities around the world? Because that is a huge growth market. I mean, you say that's a limited place where this sort of model makes sense, but it is also,
a really
world.
important regulatory thing that can either prevent it or support it is whether they're considered as gross floor area or not.
Explain that a little bit.
So, well, the sort of places where it makes sense to do it is dense cities where land costs are very high. And so nobody is going to give away land area to a garden when it could be earning them revenue or sold off, for instance. So the big transformation in Singapore was when they said, okay, communal sky gardens, not ones that are privately attached to strata areas like a home, but ones that are in the common areas, they're exempt from the floor area calculation. And that was the point when developers sort of said, well, it costs us something to build it, but it's a marketing plus, and we can justify the cost. And we're not losing any apartments, and we're not losing any net to gross efficiency by putting these things in. And in fact, in a case like PARKROYAL, there was, it's sort of in fact a net benefit, because the hotel operator can hold functions and things there. So in a way, they got a bonus floor area.
And they also got better rates as well, eventually, more than they imagined. And they're it's doing far better than other hotels in the region, in the area. But I think that it's a very direct benefit. It's a Singapore government recognizing it as not floor area. But now we're actually doing quite a few projects overseas, even in China and even in Brisbane. They now come to accept and realize that these are actually good to have things in the building. It's just like another having gyms or having a pool, but it's actually worthwhile having gardens. So they are putting aside area and building them as gardens. So I think that is as a result of seeing what we've done, and that people are actually enjoying this direction that we're heading.
And in China and in Australia and most places, it is still considered part of the gross floor area.
Yes.
But I think it depends, because like in Australia where we're doing it, they don't actually have a floor area limit. So it's not losing them
control.
apartments.
But in China, it is counted, and that because the scale of the developments in China is so large, and that if you actually do increase your selling price a little bit to account for it, you could easily make up for it, and that's what they started to do. So the larger developments tend to have them.
I see.
Yeah, I guess it's very specific. Each location has its own formulas and balances between regulations and land price and construction cost and selling price. So it's probably something that in every location. You've got to test a little bit and see what the roadblock is to do it, and see whether that roadblock could be removed.
But I'm hearing nothing inherently holding it back from any climate or economic situation, except
No.
truly low density, low land
Yeah.
area.
Yeah. Which, I mean, you can still do it. It's just that it may
just
be
why.
expensive, and why would you?
Sure,
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
You're most welcome.
Most welcome.